Start of your journey. Today was a very special day, Ash mused as he woke up from a long night of fitful sleep. Today he would set out on his Pokemon journey. His quest to become the best that he could be, to become a Pokemon master. He had been eagerly awaiting this day for years now. Ash had been a trainer for close to 2 years, but he didn't actually feel like a real trainer. Lucario was simply so strong that he couldn't help train him in any meaningful manner. But today he would get his own starter Pokemon. A Pokemon that he could nurture, raise up to be a powerful battler, and forge an ironclad friendship with. The Aura user jumped up from his bed at the crack of dawn. He was simply too excited to try and go back to sleep. Quickly shutting off the alarm clock before it could go off, he stepped towards his closet. The excited to the point of bouncing up and down on the balls of his feet young man quickly took out his clothes and began putting them on. He finished his ensemble with his brand new official Pokemon League Expo hat. He looked at it fondly before he put it on. It fit just right. Out of the corner of his eyes he spotted Sir Aaron's gloves laying neatly on his desk. Lucario had given them to him as a gift when he had turned 10 years old. He smiled and walked towards the desk. He picked up the gloves and put them on. Just like his hat, they fit perfectly. Ash took one last look at his room. It would probably be some time before he would see it again. He smiled and quickly walked out the door. He found Lucario out in the hall waiting for him. He was leaning up against the wall with his arms crossed. His mentor smirked at him. No words needed to be exchanged between the two, they knew each other too well for that. They quickly made for the kitchen where, to their surprise, Delia was already making breakfast. Good morning you two, Delia said. She smiled at Ash and Lucario. You're right on time, I've just finished making breakfast. Ash and Lucario wished her a good morning back and took a seat at the kitchen table. They helped themselves to a hearty breakfast of toast, scrambled eggs, and tomato juice. Delia joined them and ate her share. The breakfast was held in companionable silence. So dear, Delia spoke up as she finished her breakfast, breaking the silence. Are you ready to leave? Yeah, Ash nodded. I've already packed my backpack. It's up in my room. I intend to get my Pokemon from Professor Oak first and then come back for it. Good, Delia said, pleased. She would be able to say goodbye to her son in due time. It was a very sad thing for her that her son was leaving, but that was just the way it was. Her son was growing up, and he was going to pursue his dreams. She couldn't have been more proud of him. Ash and Lucario finished their own breakfast shortly after Delia. Seeing that it was still a good 2 hours before he could go and get his starter Pokemon, Ash and Lucario decided to go and do some training. We'll be back soon, Mom. Ash assured happily. His mother nodded at him. He nodded back and Lucario stepped close to him. Ash grabbed a hold of Lucario's arm and closed his eyes, concentrating. A blue glow emanated from behind his closed eyelids as he called upon his psychic powers. In a flash of white light and a crack of sound the two disappeared. Delia recognized a teleport when she saw one. Ash and Lucario reappeared in a meadow deep inside the forest surrounding Pallet Town. He let go of Lucario's arm and opened his eyes. Ash looked around their training ground fondly. Well, Ash spoke up with a big grin. What'll we be do? He quickly jumped back, narrowly evading a lightning-quick swipe from Lucario. Lucario's scarlet eyes glinted in amusement. Combat, he answered simply. Pumping aura into his muscles, Lucario rushed at Ash, becoming nothing more than a blur thanks to the awe-inspiring speed he was moving at. Ash was ready for him. He sidestepped the first jab, cocked his head to the side to avoid a devastating haymaker and jumped over a low kick. He backflipped away from Lucario to give himself some more room and swiftly put his hands together, forming an aura sphere in less than a second. He hurled it at Lucario. Lucario batted the azure glowing sphere away contemptuously, causing it to hit a tree instead. You call that an aura sphere? Lucario taunted. Ash ignored it. He had learned quickly that giving into anger during combat was a one-way street to defeat. This is how you really do it. The aura Pokemon shot 2 small aura spheres from each palm, before holding both paws together and creating one double the size of the others and launching it a second behind the first 2. Ash didn't bother trying to dodge. He knew perfectly well that aura sphere was an attack that couldn't be dodged no matter what. It could only be blocked. That's why he didn't hesitate to call on his psychic powers. His eyes burned blue as he took control of the two smaller aura spheres and slammed them into the larger one, causing them to detonate long before the attack could reach him. He jerked back when Lucario suddenly appeared in front of him, having used the smoke caused by the destruction of the aura spheres to hide the fact that he had used extreme speed, and kneed his student in the stomach. Thanks to the speed Lucario had been moving at, Ash doubled over like a lawn chair and was launched away from Lucario. Ash recovered quickly in spite of the pain. He flipped in midair and planted his feet firmly into the ground, skidding over the forest floor for nearly 10 feet before coming to a stop. He didn't have long to recover though, as Lucario had already used extreme speed again and had disappeared from his eyesight for a second time. He wasn't going to let Lucario get away with doing the same trick a second time, though. Closing his eyes, he focused his aura. His perception of time seemed to slow down as the world was replaced by a clear blue representation of it in his mind's eye. Lucario reappeared behind him and threw a punch at him. Ash ducked underneath the fist aimed for the back of his neck with time to spare. He swiftly spun around and tried to take Lucario's feet out from under him, only to have him jump up to evade. Ash quickly placed his open palm up against Lucario's stomach and charged an aura sphere at point-blank range. Lucario's eyes widened as he tried to jump away to give himself enough room to block the attack, but Ash's aura sphere simply followed him mere inches from his fur. Ash smirked. "Got you," he thought in satisfaction as he detonated the aura sphere, catching Lucario in the explosion. Ash looked expectantly into the smoke. It was rare for him to land a hit on Lucario, and he savored it every time that he succeeded in doing so. When the smoke cleared, his face fell. A green force field that he recognized as a protect surrounded Lucario. It dropped a moment later, having done its job of protecting him against Ash's aura sphere. "A good attempt. You nearly had me there," Lucario admitted. A wild grin appeared on his face. "But you're still not fast enough." Ash hid his frustration behind a calm mask and charged up another aura sphere. He hurled it at his foe. Lucario's grin widened and caught the aura sphere in between his paws. Ash's eyes widened when Lucario added his own aura to the aura sphere and tripled it in size before throwing it back at Ash. Ash gulped as absolutely huge aura sphere soared towards him. Knowing that this particular aura sphere had too much force behind it to stop psychically, he decided to err on the side of caution. He clapped his hands together and focused his aura, allowing it to course up his arms and into the palms of his hands. Pulling his palms appeared and throwing his arms wide, he sent out an ever-expanding shockwave of aura outwards towards the immense aura sphere. The sphere and wave of aura clashed with spectacular results. They detonated into a magnificent fireball that lit up the clearing and threw small embers everywhere. Suddenly, Ash went on the offensive. Pumping a large amount of aura into his legs, he quickly closed the distance between himself and Lucario, who grinned and shifted into a slightly different combat stance. Ash grinned back and shifted the aura in his legs in a very peculiar manner, causing his speed to suddenly triple, to the point of leaving after images of himself behind as he moved at blinding speed. Ash began circling around his enemy at his highest speed, creating several images of himself as he blurred in and out of sight between them, attacking from every angle, every opening he could find. Lucario recognized the danger immediately. Said Pokémon blocked the attacks with some effort. His eyes were closed as he followed Ash's every single move with his aura, allowing him to evade Ash's ferocious attack uninjured. Suddenly, his left fist shot out and caught Ash in the shoulder, causing him to recoil and breaking his offensive. Smirking, Lucario attacked. The spikes on the back of his paws glowed silver as they erupted and took the form of triple-bladed claws, using Metal Claw. Ash's eyes widened mere moments before he began a dance of death with Lucario. He was forced to dodge every single lightning-fast claw swipe that sang for his body as they passed mere inches from his skin. He weaved in between every single strike as he was steadily pushed back by the assault. A bit of his hair was cut off as he dodged a little too late. The aura trainee snarled. With speed that Lucario hadn't expected, Ash's arms batted away his next two swipes. Thrown off balance, Ash stepped into his guard, reared back, and punched him straight in the jaw in one fluid movement. Ash smirked, happy to have finally struck Lucario. So exultant was he that he missed the hardening of Lucario's eyes. Before Ash knew what had happened, Lucario had kicked him in the chest. Ash stumbled back, coughing as the blow had robbed him of all his oxygen. Not giving Ash a chance to recover, Lucario took Ash's feet out from under him with a low kick. Ash moved to stand up, but the touch of steel at his throat halted his motions. Ash looked up and wasn't surprised to see Lucario standing over him, holding his metal claws to his throat. He sighed. "I concede," he said dispassionately. Nodding, Lucario dismissed his metal claws and offered his hand to Ash. He took it gratefully and was pulled upright by his mentor. Dusting himself of Ash looked up to regard Lucario. "That was the first time you went all out on me, isn't it?" "Right there at the end," Ash deadpanned. "Got it in one," Lucario nodded. "I was surprised you were able to strike me when I was actually taking you semi-seriously, so I decided to up the ante." "How did I do?" Ash questioned, eager to hear his mentor's response. "All things considered, very well. You blocked and evaded nearly all of my attacks, showed great tactics in the heat of battle, and actually managed to hit me. Many Pokemon wouldn't be able to do the same to me, even when I'm battling only semi-seriously," Lucario said, pride shining through his speech. Ash grinned, proud of himself and basking in Lucario's praise. Pausing, he looked upwards toward the sun. It's still too early to go and get my starter Pokemon. What do you want to do until it's time?" Lucario shrugged. "I'm going to meditate. You can do whatever you like." Having said that, Lucario dropped down to sit in the grass and assumed a cross-legged position. Closing his eyes, Lucario quickly lost himself in his meditation. Ash sighed. Deciding that Lucario had the right idea, he too sat down on the grass. He crossed his legs and closed his eyes and started to meditate. His heart slowed down as he centered himself and became one with nature. Mere moments before his mind entered a Zen state, he had only one thought. Life is wonderful. 2 hours later, Ash was walking down Pallet Town's main road towards Oak's lab. Lucario was back inside his Pokeball that hung around his neck on a silver chain. As he walked, he smiled and waved to some of the people who wished him good luck on his journey. Pallet was such a small town that everybody knew that he and a few other kids would be starting today. It barely took him 10 minutes to reach the lab. Ash's eyes idly ran over the white building, having seen it many times in the past. He saw 3 other kids standing in front of the doors leading in. Before he could greet them, he was interrupted by a familiar yet irritating voice. "So, you showed up after all," Gary said arrogantly. "I'm already looking forwards to proving how much better I am than you, Ash." "We'll just have to see about that," Ash responded, rolling his eyes at Gary's attitude. "Having a famous grandfather doesn't automatically make you a great trainer." The other 2 kids looked uncomfortable at the mounting scene. Ash recognized them, they lived in Pallet Town after all. One of them was a rather tall, for his age at least, and handsome boy named Dennis and a pretty young girl named Ani. "No, it doesn't," Gary surprisingly agreed. "But being talented does, and I am very talented." "Yeah, right. If you're so talented with Pokemon, then how come you didn't know not to go trespassing into Beedrill territory?" Ash asked, referring to an incident 2 months ago when Gary had accidentally wandered too close to a Beedrill hive and got stung all over for his troubles. He was lucky that the Beedrill only wanted to drive him they hadn't used poison. To Ash's amusement, Gary had been covered in nasty purple welts for a month after that. Just thinking about it almost made him laugh. "Shut up," Gary snapped, his face colored in embarrassment or anger, Ash didn't know which. "At least I don't go strutting around with toys around my neck," he shouted, pointing at the Pokeball hanging around Ash's neck. Ash raised an eyebrow in surprise. The Pokeball wasn't a toy. It was, after all, a genuine article and held a very powerful Pokemon, but Gary didn't know that. He could see why Gary would think it was fake or a toy. As a matter of fact, no one knew of Lucario's existence besides himself, his mother, and Professor Oak. Simply because Lucario wanted to avoid attention. The only reason that Professor Oak knew of him was because one of his own Pokemon, a dreadfully powerful Alakazam, had picked up on Lucario's presence and had immediately informed the good professor. On top of that, no one knew that Ash was an aura user and a psychic. Again, only his mother, himself, Lucario, and Professor Oak knew. He was proud of his abilities, yes, but thanks to Gary's constant boasts during his childhood and Lucario's training, both physical and mental, he had developed a serious aversion for boasting. So he kept his abilities to himself. He wouldn't have any problem showing them to people, he just didn't like parading his abilities around for everyone to see. It was just too much hassle. Before Ash could snap back at Gary, the glass doors of the lab neatly slid open. Ash rushed in first, followed quickly by Gary, Dennis and Ani following close behind. At the end of the cold, sterile room they had entered stood a petite woman in a neat and blemish-free white lab coat. Hello, she greeted them warmly. You must be the new trainers I was told about. Follow me and I'll take you to Professor Oak. The petite woman quickly led them to the professor's private room. The group didn't talk with each other as they walked, they were too anxious and excited to get their starters for that. After a moment of walking they entered a small room to the right of the main lab. Ash immediately ignored the rest of the room as his eyes were drawn to the very center of the place. There, on a round white pedestal, laid 3 Pokeballs holding the starter Pokemon, ready to be picked. He swallowed. Professor Oak, the foremost expert on Pokemon, stood beside the pedestal. He smiled at them and greeted them by name, easing the tension a bit. He waved them over and the group quickly stepped closer in response. Ash quickly noticed a small problem. Professor. Oak looked over to him curiously. There are only 3 Pokeballs and 4 trainers, so. Oops, the professor muttered quietly, realizing the problem. He brightened up as he thought of something. It's no problem. I have a 4th Pokemon here. It's a bit feisty and hasn't been properly tamed yet for the use of a rookie trainer, but I am sure that each of you would be able to handle it. Now, who's willing to wait for their Pokemon? I don't want the others to have to wait. There was a pregnant pause amongst the hopeful trainers. No one wanted to wait for their Pokemon. After half a minute of awkward silence, Ash sighed. He supposed it was time to take one for the team, so to speak. Besides, he had Lucario to help him. He was the best equipped to deal with a Pokemon that was going to be rebellious. Ash shook his head and raised his hand. I'll wait, he said sadly. Professor Oak nodded and looked impressed with him. Oak turned away from him and addressed the others. The Pokeball to the left holds Bulbasaur, a grass type. The Pokeball in the middle holds Charmander, a fire type. The Pokeball to the right holds Squirtle, a water type. Each of them has their own strengths and weaknesses, but a skilled trainer can use any of them very well. Gary, ever the confident one, was the first one to step forwards and boldly grabbed Squirtle's Pokeball. He released it and smiled down at it, pleased with what he saw. Dennis stepped up next and chose Charmander. He released it and looked down at his new partner curiously. Charmander looked back up at him, black eyes hopeful and happy. Bending down, Dennis petted it and whispered soft words into Charmander's ear. Apparently it liked what it heard because it practically leapt into the waiting arms of Dennis. Ani was last and picked Bulbasaur. She released the grass-type starter as well. Bulbasaur yawned as it was released and laid down on the ground to sleep. Ani giggled, apparently finding the grass type very cute. She pet and cooed it as it slept. Now that's done, please return your Pokemon, Oak said seriously. I have an important favor to ask of you all. There was some disappointed grumbling from the new trainers, but they heeded the request and returned their Pokemon. They looked curiously at Professor Oak as he took out 4 strange red devices from the pockets in his lab coat, 2 from each one, and handed each youth one of the strange red devices. These machines are my newest invention, the Pokédex, Oak announced proudly. You can scan any Pokemon you run into with this machine and it will provide you with detailed information regarding that Pokemon. For example, the Pokédex will tell you what type it is, what it likes to eat, what species it is, which gender it is, and it will tell you what moves that Pokemon knows. 4 pair of eyes widened as the trainers looked down at their Pokédex in awe. Professor Oak's voice quickly broke through their reverie. These Pokédex will collect a detailed amount of information on any Pokemon you use it on, adding extra information to my memory banks on that particular Pokemon, but I need someone else to search the world for me. I'm too old to gather them myself, you see. So I'm entrusting each of you with a Pokédex to collect the information for me, Oak explained calmly. The 4 trainers nodded, accepting the responsibility. Oak looked pleased. Good. Now that that's done, I suggest you leave and get ready for your journey. Ash, stay behind. The other 3 trainers nodded and turned to leave. Ash waved goodbye to Dennis and Ani as they left, while Gary briefly spoke with Professor Oak before leaving as well. Ash expectantly turned to the professor. Oak smiled at him. Well, Ash, I was hoping that you would be the one to have this Pokemon. I was rather understating it when I said it was feisty, but I reckon that with Lucario aiding you it will be no problem for someone like you, he said as he pushed a button on the side of the pedestal. A slot opened in the middle of it and a Pokeball with a lightning bolt sign carved into it popped up. Oak grabbed it and handed it to Ash. Ash took it eagerly and stared at it for a moment. He smiled and released the Pokemon inside of it. The Pokemon materialized in a flash of white light on the edge of the pedestal. He recognized it immediately, there was really no mistaking it. The Pokemon had a slightly plump yellow body with long spiky ears with black tips. A lightning bolt-shaped tail twitched behind it and brown stripes lined its back. It had coal-black eyes and red circles on its cheeks, which sparked with electricity. 2 stubby arms were crossed in a haughty manner as the Pokemon observed him in turn. It was a Pikachu, and its first ever words to Ash were, "Oh great, so you're the idiot I'm stuck with." Ash twitched at the insult. What did it say? Oak asked curiously. Why are you asking him, you old fart? It's not like he can. He called me an idiot, Ash grouched, shocking Pikachu. And you an old fart, he added. Oak's nostrils flared and he glared down at the electric type. Pikachu shrank back a little at the glare, but refused to cower in front of the suddenly very imposing professor. Pikachu's eyes were drawn back to Ash. His curiosity was piqued by this strange human that could understand him. How can you understand me? You aren't Pokeraced, are you? Ash shook his head. No. Have you ever heard of Aura? Pikachu's large ears twitched as he nodded. Well, I can use it and there's a skill that you can learn if you have access to Aura that will automatically translate Pokespeech if you master it. Pikachu looked interested at that. I see. There was a pause. So, now what? Ash looked quizzically at the electric type. I'm going to train you to become super strong. That's what trainers do. Pikachu doubled over laughing his ass off. Nice joke. He spoke in between his guffaws. Now Ash looked offended. Seeing this, the electric type started laughing even harder. Oh, you were being serious. That's even funnier. Ash's face colored slightly. He took a deep breath to calm himself down and counted back to 10. Pikachu stopped laughing after a minute and looked back up at Ash. Look, kid. I appreciate the offer, but I've been doing just fine on my own. I don't need your help, the electric type said seriously. I can train you, Ash said. He ignored Pikachu's eye roll. Come on, what do you have to lose by giving me a chance? Time, Pikachu deadpanned. And lost time cannot be regained like some other things. I have already wasted too much of it here because of this old fart, the Pokemon said, gesturing to Professor Oak. And now that we're talking about the old fart. His cheeks sparked as he launched a tiny stream of electricity at the professor. Oak yelped as he got a nasty shock and his hair, what was left of it at least, got frizzled into a mess. That was for the wire thing, you old fart. They were delicious and you had to go and ruin it. Pikachu raged. Oak glared at him and tried to get his hair back in order. Ash made a show of looking Pikachu over. What I've seen of you so far, I doubt you'd be able to beat me, let alone another Pokemon, he taunted, knowing that it was unfair to make that allegation. He was an Aura user and a psychic after all. One that was strong enough to keep up with Lucario, a Pokemon that was approaching Elite 4 levels of strength. He knew that he could kick Pikachu's ass, but if taunting him like this got him what he wanted, then he was all for it. Pikachu twitched. What did you say, human? The Pokemon hissed. I think you heard me just fine, Ash returned. He stared down at the fuming Pikachu. Why, you little? Pikachu started shouting. Ash interrupted him by raising his hand and finger flicking him. Having used his aura to magnify his strength, the seemingly light bump launched Pikachu away like a rag doll. Ash smirked and lowered his hand. You were saying. Pikachu got up from his position on the floor and rubbed his head where Ash had finger flicked him. It felt like he had been hit by a drill peck to the forehead. He was pissed. Gathering his power quickly, Pikachu launched a medium-sized thunderbolt at Ash. Professor Oak screamed at Ash to dodge, but he was ready for it. His eyes burned blue as he exerted his will upon the world and mentally grabbed the thunderbolt. The attack wavered and boomeranged back at Pikachu, who gasped in surprise and was struck by his own attack. The attack didn't do much, it merely singed his fur a little, but it pissed him off even more. I thought you were an aura user, not a psychic. Pikachu shouted angrily, shaking his slightly singed fur. I don't remember saying that I wasn't a psychic either, Ash returned calmly. Seething, Pikachu took off in a blur of motion as he used quick attack, moving so fast that all you could see of him was a yellow blur. The electric type lunged at Ash from the side, his head angled to hit Ash in between the eyes. Ash snorted and casually snagged Pikachu up in midair mere inches from his face. You know, a smart Pokemon wouldn't attack head-on when they know that their opponent is stronger than they are. You aren't stronger than me. Pikachu shouted. He trashed around helplessly in Ash's iron-like grip. Getting an idea, the mouse Pokemon closed his eyes and used Thunderbolt at point-blank range, allowing it to surge all over his body and into Ash. Not hearing the expected cry of pain, Pikachu opened his eyes and looked at Ash in shock. Said person was smiling as Pikachu's Thunderbolt danced across his body without any visible effect. Even his clothes weren't affected. Come on. How are you immune electricity? You're human. Pikachu raged indignantly. Ash smiled. Oh, it's simple really. I'm using my aura to channel it harmlessly into the ground. Neat isn't it? Giving an unadulterated scream of rage, Pikachu increased the voltage. It only succeeded in tiring him out faster. Ash held his amused smile as the electricity dancing across his body grew thicker and brighter in color, but still did nothing to him. Pikachu was panting deeply when he finally let up on the electricity. His fur was soaked in sweat and his body was trembling from overexertion. He sagged in Ash's grip. The electric mouse was close to despair. He had tried so hard and yet he had not even been able to scratch the human. A human? How absurd could you get? I give up, Pikachu said morosely. You win. I'll follow your commands. Pikachu, one thing that I don't want is blind obedience, Ash said, surprising the mouse Pokemon. He sat down on a chair in the room and moved to cradle Pikachu in his arms. Calling on his aura, he placed his right hand over the Pokemon's chest. His hand flared blue, directing his aura to restore the electric type's energy reserves. The blue glow spread to cover Pikachu's entire body, who gasped as he felt his strength return to him. He stopped trembling and his electrical energy returned in full. Why? Why did you help me? Pikachu questioned in disbelief after a moment of dumbfounded silence. He got up but didn't move to get away from Ash, something that made the trainer grin. Because I didn't like seeing you so weak. Because I don't want to be your enemy. Ash looked Pikachu in the eyes, black meeting brown as he earnestly tried to appeal to Pikachu. Because I want to be your friend and trainer. Pikachu remained silent for a while after Ash's declaration. He just stared Ash in the eyes, not looking away for even a second, trying to find any hint of a lie. After a moment of silently staring, the Pokemon spoke. You'll make me strong. Be my friend through thick and thin. Do anything to help me. Ash nodded resolutely, there was no doubt. A brilliant smile lit up on Pikachu's face. All right then. I'll be your Pokemon partner. Smiling brightly at the declaration of partnership, Ash drew Pikachu in a one-armed hug. Thank you, he whispered. Professor Oak cleared his throat to get their attention. Ash and Pikachu looked over at him. Now that you've made friends and nearly destroyed my lab while doing so, he gave them a hard look. Ash and Pikachu looked sheepish. I think it's time for you to set out, Ash. It's a big world out there and you will need all the time you have to explore it. Now, off you go. Ash laughed and stood up. Pikachu scampered up his arm and took a seat on Ash's shoulder, settling down on it like he had been doing it for ages. Somehow, it just felt right, like it was meant to be this way. He gave the good professor a two-fingered salute and a mocking bow before storming out of the lab, laughing all the while. Good luck, my dear boy, Professor Oak said fondly. He smiled into the distance. Knowing your luck, you're gonna need it. Ash's mother was watching TV when Ash, with Pikachu on his shoulder, walked in the front door. She jumped up and squealed in excitement when she saw the small Pokemon on his shoulder. Oh, Ash. It's so cute. She cried before grabbing Pikachu from his shoulder and crushing him in a hug. Ash was momentarily concerned that Pikachu might try and shock her after being grabbed so suddenly, but a second look told him all he needed to know. Pikachu seemed to enjoy the attention. After a moment of fawning over Pikachu, his mom set him down before going to get his backpack from his room. Pikachu walked back to him and jumped back on his shoulder. Your mother is rather energetic, he mused. Ash snorted at the gross understatement. Delia came back a few moments later carrying his backpack, and he took it gratefully. Zipping it open, he looked inside to make sure that he had everything that he would need on his journey. Food for himself and his Pokemon. Check. A map. Check. Rope and potions. Check. A few more things were in the bottom and side pockets, but he didn't look at those yet. He had all the necessities and anything else he could buy at Viridian City. Now all that was left was to say goodbye to his mom. Ash turned to her, but before he could say anything she had wrapped him in a crushing hug. He sputtered and wheezed as his ribs were being squeezed painfully tight, and when his mom finally let go he gasped for air. Stay safe, she said. Ash thought that he could see tears in her eyes, but she pushed him out of the door before he could check. After having said a quick goodbye to his mother and getting his backpack full of supplies from his room, Ash had quickly left his hometown behind. He quickly found himself on Route 1 heading toward Viridian City. He smiled as he took in the beauty of nature around him. This is nice, Ash commented as he surveyed the scenery of Route 1. Pikachu nodded in agreement from Ash's shoulder. He had been in that dusty old lab for far too long for his liking. It was nice to be out in nature again. Ash took a deep breath and started trudging down the beaten path. Pikachu cocked his head curiously at Ash. When will we start training? That question brought Ash up short. He pondered it shortly and nodded decisively as he came to decision. The rookie trainer walked off the path and into the tall grass. We'll start training right now. It would be better if I had a better grasp of your abilities anyway. Pikachu nodded and observed his trainers as he searched for a good place to train, which he found a few moments later. They now found themselves in a small meadow a fair ways away from the path. Lush green grass stretched out as far as the eye could see and a pond of clear blue water added to the scenery. Ash came to a stop and smiled at the scene. Pikachu jumped from his shoulder and turned to face him, standing at attention. Ash took out his Pokédex. Pikachu cocked his head curiously at it as he hit the scan button. Pikachu, the mouse Pokemon, and the evolved form of Pichu. The Pokédex droned in monotonously. Pikachu's tail is sometimes struck by lightning as it raises it to check its surroundings. This Pikachu is male and knows the moves Quick Attack, Thunderbolt, Thunder Wave, and Volt Tackle. Note: the move Volt Tackle is hereditary and is very rare for one of the Pikachu evolutionary line to possess. This Pikachu has the ability Lightning Rod, which forces all electrical attacks to target this Pokemon no matter what the circumstances. In addition, all electrical attacks will do no damage and will increase this Pokemon's attack power. To be frank, Ash was stunned that Pikachu already knew so many powerful moves. He had some incredibly powerful electric-type moves behind him, and many of his attacks would bring down other Pokemon easily through a mix of sheer power, and the paralysis effect that would follow them. The extremely handy Lightning Rod ability was the icing on the cake. After all, electric-type attacks tended to be exceptionally powerful against most organic Pokemon. Even if they didn't do much real damage, they tended to be incredibly painful and could easily stop a Pokemon in its tracks. Most living creatures weren't meant to take thousands of volts of electricity, even if Pokemon were tough enough to handle it. All he could say was, "Wow." Pikachu looked pleased at the reaction and gave him a mocking bow. "I aim to please." Ash shook his head and refocused. "You certainly weren't lying when you said you were doing fine on your own," he commented. Pikachu smiled. "There's one problem, though. Most of your attacks are all electrical based, which makes ground types your bane," he continued. Pikachu's smile turned into an ugly grimace, showing that he knew that as well. And seeing as the first gym leader uses rock and ground types, that could be a real problem. Pikachu nodded, his grimace slowly setting itself into a determined expression. So, what do we do about it? We train and teach you some new moves, to round you out and give you a weapon against ground and rock types, Ash said as he pondered which moves to teach Pikachu. Iron Tail and Dig are good choices. Since rock types and ground types are generally rather slow, I also think we need to work on your speed to give you an edge. Throw in Double Team and I think we can be reasonably sure that they will have a lot of trouble hitting you at all, let alone taking you out. What do you think? Pikachu was slightly taken aback. He hadn't expected to be included in on the decision-making process. He was the Pokemon and Ash was the trainer after all. It did make him feel oddly pleased, though. What you said sounds good to me. Let's do it. Ash nodded and smiled. We will, but first I want to introduce you to someone. Pikachu blinked, wondering as to who Ash wanted to introduce him to. Ash pulled the Pokeball off the silver chain around his neck and released Lucario, who materialized right next to Ash in a flash of white. Hello Ash, Lucario said after he was released. He stretched and placed his arms carelessly behind his head. The Aura Pokemon lazily glanced at Pikachu and smiled. And who is our new friend? Pikachu, this is Lucario, my mentor and friend. Lucario, this is Pikachu, the starter Pokemon Professor Oak gave me. Ash smiled as he introduced his Pokemon to each other. What does he mean by, my mentor? Pikachu muttered to himself, a little put out that he wasn't Ash's first Pokemon. Exactly what it sounds like, actually. Lucario was the one that taught me about Aura and trained me in the ways of Pokemon, Ash answered, having easily overheard Pikachu's muttered question. Makes sense, Pikachu said with a nod. There would be no better teacher for learning how to use Aura than an Aura Pokemon. Quite, Ash agreed. He smiled as he continued. Now that the introductions are out of the way, let's start training. I think it would be best if we teach you the new moves first and then work on your speed as we travel to Pewter City for our first gym match. Pikachu nodded in agreement. Lucario observed the two silently. He was happy that everything seemed to be running smoothly. How are you going to teach me these new moves? Pikachu asked curiously. If they were easy to learn, then I would know them already. Oh, that's easy, Ash replied happily. For Pokemon, learning new attacks comes instinctively for the most part. Attacks that they learn naturally are easily taught if you know the right training exercises. And as for attacks that they don't learn naturally, it just takes a bit more prodding for them to learn. We'll start off with Double Team since you can learn that naturally. After that we'll work on Iron Tail and Dig while we travel. We can work on your speed at the same time. A big grin spread across Ash's face. Are you ready? Pikachu nodded resolutely, grinning right back at Ash. I was born ready. Laughing, Ash promised, you're gonna regret it. Oh, and how he regretted it. Pikachu moaned as fell down next to the campfire. He was spent from an entire day of traveling and training. Ash was right, he regretted